Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of On the Record, where we sit down with professional musicians and talk to them about how they've actually found success in the music business. Today we're sitting down with someone who I have admired as a guitar player basically since I started playing fingerstyle and thumbstyle when I was a very little kid. But as I've gotten older, his career has become so much more interesting to me because he has done basically everything in the music industry in some way, shape, or another. John Knowles, John, thank you so much for sitting down and talking to me. This is fantastic.
Oh, I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah. I usually just jump right in with a question right at first, but I want to say at the top of this that doing introductions for people like yourself are a lot of times very difficult because I try to say, one of my favorite guitar players, but you really have done everything in some way, shape, or form.
That's really true, and as we chat, I'm sure it'll all come up, but I got into this so early that there was not a real obvious way to make a living doing it. And so all along the way, I have had to adapt and recreate and change my mind. So that's one of the reasons I end up doing a little bit of everything, is looking for something that will work at a given moment in my musical development and so forth. So
absolutely. So I think that kind of brings us into the question that I always ask at the top of my interviews, which is, can you tell us what a normal workday looks like for you right now as a professional musician?
Well, right now, Becky and I, my wife Becky, of many, many years, go down to the living room, and we have a piano bench and the living room and a couple of lights and an iPhone with a microphone, and we're taping short video segments from my teaching channel. It's called the Fingerstyle Buffet.
Okay.
A little something for everyone. Come back tomorrow for more, And so a part of TrueFire's system. And what I've done is I've kind of divided it into 4 sections. One of them is about interacting with my musical heroes. Another one is technical stuff, chop talk. Another one is songs you can learn. And then also I'm finding occasions to play tunes with other people. And so that's the play date. So those 4 sections give me ways to have a conversation with guitar players out there who are learning. And I'm kind of pitching it at an intermediate level, except every now and then what I've noticed for myself, true, I would get to a place where I thought I was intermediate, and I realized there was some beginning stuff that was causing a problem. So a number of times I've gone back and kind of had to reinvent beginning exercises so that I could take the next intermediate plus step. So the courses, every now and then I'm doing something really simple about keeping time with your thumb, or that you think you've got it because you can play Freight Train.
Sure.
But if you listen, you say, I don't think a drummer would be happy with my time.
Well, so part of the reason why I ask that question is so that we can learn right up front in the interview a little bit about what you've got going on as part of your business model right now.
Yeah.
And something that I think, and please correct me if I'm wrong
No.
with this, but something that I think we can say about your career is throughout every iteration of your career, music education and guitar education has played some role.
Yeah, it has. I would say it was maybe a number of years ago, there was a magazine, Guitar Teacher magazine, that was interviewing me, and the interviewer asked me, so you work really hard on being a guitar player, but you also work really hard being a teacher. That seems like an unusual combination. And that struck me as an unusual question. And my answer was, I said, well, I think I set out to be a better player than most teachers and a better teacher than most players. And what I mean by that is I don't think I'm the best guitar player in the world. I'm not the best guitar teacher in the world. But I really value being a good player and sharing. So I'm working hard to keep both of those things afloat, in my own life. And it gives me a chance to interact with so many fun people. I mean, that's really how Chet and I got started working together, is the fact that I could notate what he was doing. So
Sure. Well, we'll get to that part. But actually, I would like to, with talking about your business model and your career and kind of making a living as a musician, I would like to sort of go to a point in your life that you've discussed in other interviews, and we can sort of gloss over some of the parts that I think have been covered very well in other interviews. But I'd like to talk about specifically your transition from academia mathematics and physics, and your professional career that resulted from that, and sort of why and how you made the move over to music. So if we could just start with you describing Texas Instruments and that part and the move from there.
Yeah, so at Texas Instruments, I was there in Dallas at the research lab, and this was right when calculators were going from the desktop to something you could hold in your hand. So we were doing all kind of physics, trying to get the numbers to come to work on a low battery charge and that kind of stuff, and it was great. It was really fun. But I would find that at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I'd be looking at my watch to see if I could go home and play the guitar. So this guitar thing, it just had not gone away. It was just, I was what I would call at that point a very serious amateur, which in fact a lot of people are. I talk to people all the time who have a job and a passion, and they move parallel like that. So there's a whole decade in there where that's me. So our son is born, and you know how you get, Becky and I sat down and started having conversations about, well, our life just got a little bit more real, and then it didn't take us a week to realize I didn't belong in a research lab. Wow. And she knew it too, and that was now people ask us, what were you thinking? And the answer is, we weren't thinking anything. We were like ticking our pulse, and that's what it felt like. Our next step was to give music a chance, and we'd saved up a fair amount of money because I'd never made that much money before, and I kind of figured out then that if I was going to make it, because I hadn't been a professional player, and I'm now 28, something like that, I'm thinking, well, I'll get better as a teacher. And by that I meant I was not ever a very good teacher. People loved to take lessons from me, but they didn't get much better. They just kind of liked hanging out and asking me questions, And I thought, if I'm really a teacher, my students have to get better. And there has to be, like a business model again.
Sure.
And so I really, kind of the deal was, we're going to try this for a year, and I have to become very successful as a teacher. And part of that success means that I have to make money doing it so that we have, food on the table. So we gave ourselves a year to try that out, and that was years ago.
Well, so you actually answered my next question, which was, if you sat down and came up with a plan, because I do think, like you said, I like that term, professional, or a professional amateur, or advanced amateur, and that idea that there are a lot of people out there who are working professional jobs, or working in a field unrelated to music, who would love to figure out how to do this.
I know what you mean. I think the first thing I did was I figured out how to get the most music into a technical day, a physicist day.
Okay.
That was step one. And what I would do, for instance, I would wake up, and I figured out you could pick up the guitar and play for 5 minutes while Mr. Coffee did his thing, So I didn't waste any little 3 to 5 minute segments that could have been music moments. The other thing I remember doing that is I would get in the car on my way to Texas Instruments, and I would say, "Too late, Texas Instruments. I'm already a musician," because I've practiced, So it's a mindset, an approach. Then when I would come home, I would make sure that there was some guitar time each day, and at that time, I guess I had listened to Chet for a long time, and to Jerry Reed. The Beatles had come out, so I was trying to work up Beatle arrangements. But I hadn't met anybody,
Sure.
It was just, matter of fact, I was still kind of isolated. I didn't know anybody who was like me, who had this bad a case of it,
Well, so a couple more questions on that before we move on. I know that you said that you had saved up, a little nest egg, if you will, before you dove into it. But did you find yourself having to make lifestyle adjustments? One term we hear about quite a bit now is lifestyle creep, where you start earning more money and suddenly you have to continue making that money to support the lifestyle. Was guitar the plan, so you didn't go that direction, or how did all of that work without getting into specific numbers?
Well, yeah, actually, that's interesting, because every now and then what I'll do is I'll go on, my iPhone, and I'll say, here's what I was making in 1968, if I inflate that, have I kept up with it? And the answer is almost.
Oh, wow.
So, and part of that is because what I knew at that point only had a certain value. And as more people wanted to know about the guitar, I was ahead of the track a little bit. And then plus I knew things from years ago when people weren't playing yet, you know. I would say the big folk music thing is when everybody all of a sudden owned guitars. But before that, there weren't many of us. And so the fact that I had sat down in a room across from Johnny Smith and things like that, you know, as a teenager, that was really strange, you know, for everybody, and compared to everybody else I knew. And then when I left Texas Instruments, I didn't realize it, but Dallas was really about to grow as a classic guitar scene. They opened up a store and they asked me to teach, and one of the owners of the shop had been in one of Segovia's classes.
Oh, wow.
And knew the Romeros and knew Christopher Parkening.
Oh, wow.
And before long, these major league classical guys were showing up and staying in town for 2 or 3 days and doing workshops. So my fingerstyle thing, at some point I slipped out of my thumb pick, you know, and kind of changed my hand position and rebuilt my technique to be more like a classical player, and really pursued that seriously, although I knew I was never going to be like a classical artist.
Okay.
But it became a major component in the way I think and play, on top of my thumb pick, Chet Atkins, Merle Travis, Jerry Reed stuff, you know. So
Sure.
now what you see is a mishmash of all those things.
Sure. Well, I think that kind of leads us in nicely to my last question with regard to the transition from the, kind of academia professional career to the professional music career, which is, I recognize you are a very humble person, but kind of if we can set the humility aside for a second and have an honest conversation about, were you at that point in your playing career, would you describe yourself as the type of prolific player that you are today? Would you say, I guess the way that I'm asking the question, would you say that you that the abilities came from the result of having shifted your career to being a full-time musician and having the time to work on the things that made you the player you are today, or do you feel like you had a lot of that under your belt when you made the transition?
You know, that's a good question, and I'd say the answer is both.
Okay.
I was pretty far along, so that, for instance, I remember when I would be in workshops with guys like Pepe Romero or Christopher Parkening, they really recognized how cool what I knew so far was, but they also recognized how much I wasn't playing the classic guitar. So my ability as an arranger and as a player was already pretty well developed by the time I left Texas Instruments. I will say, and this is true today, I'm still learning some things and developing some things. When you get older, you know, your chops don't do everything they used to do. You creak in the morning, you know. And so there's things like that. But also what you have is years of experience as a musician, as an artist, as a teacher, as a person who interacts with other musicians. So you've got something going for you that you don't have when you're young and frisky, you know. And so I would say at every stage, I entered that stage with something already in place, but I came away, for instance, from 3 or 4 years of hanging around classical players with a definite increase in my technical ability, as well as a broadened musical palette. And then after that is when I met Chet Atkins. He came to Dallas, so then I'm kind of back into that. But now, by the time Chet meets me, I look more like a classical player, even though I can play a lot of his stuff. So that's kind of the timeline. And so I'm 28, so I'm maybe early 30s. I'm meeting Chet. So there's about a 4-year period when I'm going at it as serious. I've always done this. I went at it as seriously as if I were going to play at Carnegie Hall. I knew I wasn't, but that was the attitude, you know.
Okay.
So
So kind of moving to that period where you're teaching and you're meeting Chet Atkins and your career is sort of taking shape as a musician at that point. One of the things that I know you got into very early on was education material, like the written publishing.
yeah.
Could we talk about that and sort of how your career sort of followed that path then and sort of what it looks like now?
Yeah, that's actually, there is a moment there, and I would say those Dallas years at that music store, Fret and Strings, number one, I've kind of made the leap, and so I'm hungry and committed. But also, there's some classical players teaching at that store. There's a couple of really good blues singers. Another one of the teachers there is kind of the go-to play jingles in the studio guy. So there's this huge array of different players. And we had a thing where at the end of every Thursday, we would get together and compare notes about how teaching was going,
Oh,
what
wow.
we were doing professionally. We would refer students to each other. I've been working with this kid. He really ought to go to you now. So I had a pool of people, all of whom were trying to kind of, up their game. And then the other thing that happened that was kind of a big deal was Dallas had a downtown community college, and there was a classic guitar teacher there, Robert Guthrie, a really good disciple of Segovia's. And the school system expanded to have 5 new campuses. And there was this big political argument because what they were afraid of is that people up in North Dallas would get the Texas Instruments education, and people down in South Dallas would get the auto shop education. So the rule was if you had something at one campus, you had to have it at all the campuses.
Okay.
So all of a sudden, every one of those 5 campuses needed a classic guitar teacher. I was the only one that had any kind of degree. It wasn't a music degree,
Sure.
but I had a doctorate, right? Well, good enough. And so I became, a music professor without any music background. So I'm doing that and hanging out with good people. And then the other thing that happened at that college was they would have those evening classes, where you come in and learn how to do something, basket weaving or whatever. And I took a class in calligraphy, which I thought was cool to learn how to write Old English letters and that kind of stuff.
Sure.
And I piggybacked that onto being able to write music characters, treble clef, rest signs, and so forth. And so at the music store, every year, it would be Christmas, and we would haul out our Christmas arrangements to teach kids how to play Silent Night and Away in a Manger and all
Still
that.
happens today.
And it does, yeah, everywhere. So what we did is we said, why don't I collect everybody's arrangements and I'll write them out, and we can publish the book and sell it to our students instead of giving them last year's, So it was a kind of a business model, but it was also a plan where I was going to use everybody's input. So I was building a team. There's a lot of these things that later on show up in the way I work,
Sure.
So that was 1972. So that's a couple of years before I met Chet. So by the time I meet Chet, I've already transcribed other people's arrangements. I've written them out where they look good. And I had actually started arranging a tune, The Entertainer, one of Joplin's pieces, because that movie had come out. So I meet Chet, and the first thing he does is he says, so what are you working on? And I played him, da-da-da-da-da-da, at the end of The Entertainer. And he said, finish that up and send it to me. And to me, it felt really normal because I've been hanging around guitar players, and here was a guitar player. Well, my friend that was with me that day, he's going, whoa, Chet Atkins, no, that was him, and that was you, but I couldn't get that pumped about it because Chet was so normal. He was so low key, and I walked away, and every now and then I'm thinking about it, says, yeah, that was the guy that was on those album covers, that I fell asleep every night for years, listening to. But he felt so normal and interested that it was just like we were going to work together. And it played out that way over time. To me, it's one of the real gifts is that my friend said, let's go hear Chet play with the symphony, and you can introduce us to Chet Atkins. I said, I don't know Chet Atkins. He says, introduce yourself so you can introduce me, and that's what I did. So.
I think you brought a couple things with you today that kind of apply to that story that we just heard, and we'll put it up on screen.
Okay, great, yeah.
As we go, but
I have a calligraphy piece that I did.
Yeah.
The other thing I didn't mention is a big piece of how come I know music is my granddad and my dad, both preachers. So I grew up around church music.
Okay.
So I would choir rehearsal. I would move around in the congregation, just sit next to somebody who was singing harmony. So I've loved music ever since the get-go. And so one of the things I brought with me today was I wrote out the opening chapter of Genesis for my dad with my calligraphy. So I brought my calligraphy sample.
Yeah.
You can see. My handwriting is terrible. My calligraphy is solid. And then I also brought that Christmas Carol book that we put together at the music store in 1972.
Wow.
So you can see kind of what that looks like.
So when this goes up on screen, which is probably right now, I didn't believe that it was actually handwriting. It is, guys. That it is ink on paper. That is not printed, which is really, really cool. And yeah, there's going to be some other stuff throughout the video that we share kind of like that, and I'm very excited to put
That's
it up
great.
on screen. So let's kind of go into, I think, we're gonna jump around now.
Yeah,
I
okay,
think.
sure. Yeah.
We're gonna go out of chronological order so that we can stay with publishing for a
Yeah,
minute.
okay.
Because publishing in your career has taken several different forms, and I think it's still something in the digital realm that's happening today.
That's right.
So
That's
could we
right.
talk a little bit about, you've released books, you've released periodicals, you recently are releasing digital media, you kind of mentioned a little bit. Can we sort of talk about the business of publishing for a minute?
One of the things that happened when I moved to Nashville is, in addition to being an amazing guitar player, Chet really understood the complete music business. And he would say things like, for instance, when I did the entertainer for him, he said, now, you need to send me an invoice. I'll find out what we pay arrangers in this town. He probably knew. But then his wife sent me a little note. You should send Chester a bill for $300, which I still have the note from her.
Oh, wow.
And for the entertainer. And so, and then they said, and if you'll sign this contract, we'll publish those arrangements. And that $300 will count against your royalties. So I learned about royalty advances in that first step. And then as I started doing things, by then Chet had taken me down to the Union and introduced me. And I had a song that was going to be on the radio, so he took me to BMI and had me sign up to have BMI monitor radio play at that time of that arrangement. So I was setting in place all the pieces of the publishing infrastructure. Later on, I formed a company, and I had written a song called the Gorilla Song with my son. And so I was going to call the publishing company Gorilla Music, and somebody had that.
Okay.
And the other thing I did was everybody said I played a gut string guitar. This wasn't called a classical guitar in Nashville, a gut string. So I called it gut string music. So I formed a company. So I'm John Knowles, but I'm also gut string music now. So if I write a tune, BMI, and then Harry Fox tracks when you put royalties for when you record on somebody's CD, and so all those things, and it's changing constantly because my favorite thing that shows how much things have changed, but not, is if you have a CD and you want to record my tune, you get from my company a mechanical license.
Yes.
The term mechanical comes from the earliest form of recorded music, and it's music boxes and player pianos. That's the mechanical device. And today, the internet is considered a mechanical device, and there's a whole new company out there so that you can get a mechanical license so that you can stream. But everything mechanical has changed from the music box to the internet over 100 or so years, So
Sure.
But it's all, so you learn kind of how that stuff works. And I don't know everything, but I know who to call or what to search for on the internet to keep agreements in place. And I'm not an attorney. I get somebody else to do that for me. But I know what the bullet points of a good agreement look like and so forth.
Sure. One thing that I want to follow up with you on very quickly about the entertainer specifically, because I think that is a good example of something that I think a lot of musicians don't quite understand. So this is a song that you didn't originally write, of course, but it is a song that you worked up an arrangement to on the guitar. It's a song that you recorded, and it's also a song that Chet Atkins recorded.
Right.
So how does it work for a song that, at that point, I believe it was already in the public domain?
That's right. So when a song has been written by someone else,
Yes.
and that was actually written early enough that by the time Chet and I had learned it, the copyright had expired, so it's in the public domain, which means you don't have to pay Scott Joplin to record it. And it also means that if you come up with an original arrangement of a song that's in the public domain, you can own the copyright. So at that moment, by creating that, I owned that copyright to that arrangement. Now, when Chet recorded it, I didn't have any way to earn money. You own it, but so what,
Sure.
So he had a publishing company, so I signed over my copyright to Athens Music, which was his company, and he was hooked into the infrastructure for bringing revenue in for a copyright. And that's really what publishers do, is they turn your copyright into income opportunities. Sometimes it's books, records, movies, all that kind of stuff. And so at that point, and it took me a little while to actually get some revenue, because it just took a while to fill up the pipe. Sometimes revenue can be a year or two behind the actual activity that would generate money for you, because it's a slow system. The internet has not sped it up. I think what it is whoever is out there and owes you money is in no hurry to pay you, whatever the name of that is.
Right.
I know it's your money, but I have it for the moment.
Well, so kind of moving a little bit further in time with publishing, and specifically, sticking with literature for a moment. When we are talking about physical written material that is being released today, is that still a viable business model? How has it changed throughout the years? And I think that leads us somewhat into the digital stuff that we're doing, but I don't want to answer.
Yeah. No, you're right. And I've watched that change. In the beginning, if you didn't have staples and it wouldn't sit on your music stand, and you put it on a truck to get it to you, that's how everything came. And so even today, books are still important. I don't think they could be the sole ingredient of a career, unless you were really selling a ton of books, because somebody does, I'm sure. But for instance, now, like with the entertainers, let's say I'd written a song and it was in a publishing company, and I don't want to publish books, but Hal Leonard does. So Hal Leonard might contact me and say, if you'll sign over the music print part of your copyright to me for this many years, I'll find a way to get it in books. So right now, if I wanted to go get, and play, a Beatles song or a Billy Joel song, probably what I would do is contact Hal Leonard or one of those other big print houses, and they would say, oh yeah, we've owned those rights for this much money, you can put that in your book. And that's how I got music in a lot of my other things. I would buy a license to use it, So 'cause everybody's not in the printing business. When I was first printing books, I realized after a while that, like, Mel Bay was really in the paper business. He just put music on that paper to sell it.
Okay.
But, I went by there and they had big printing presses and big rolls of paper like this, and he was investing in paper futures, and
wow.
his business model wasn't just this, and that's a multi-generational family business too. I really enjoyed working with Mel and Bill Bay over the years, and they still sell digital versions of some of the things I wrote for them. So I got a check the other day for $18, $19, something like that. Some of them are really small. And every now and then there's a big surprise one too.
Sure, sure. Well, that last part about digital, I've noticed that lately you have been putting out content with companies like TrueFire.
Yeah.
And you have a lot of your material is showing up in, Kindle format and that type of thing. And that seems to be the direction that music education material is moving to. Would you agree with that?
Yeah,
first
I
of all?
would.
Okay.
If you're not in the digital realm, I think that anything print would be a complement to what you're doing. It wouldn't be the big piece of a career.
Sure.
Now, that's not to say that somebody's not making a lot of money on books. Somebody is, but I don't think it would be like an individual musician doing something. Whereas for a while, I was able to I had maybe 5 or 6 books that were sending, and the checks would always be less than $1,000, but 200, 300, 800, depends. And what it really was, I remember we had one of those software programs where you could make a pie chart for where your income is coming from, and so books would be a slice of the pie. Today, books would be
A sliver.
Yeah, a sliver,
Sure.
a modest slice of pie, So you can kind of watch that change over time. And then every now and then, of course, the other thing, I think, if I can remember this right, so print, synchronization, and that means your song is in a movie, so you're synchronized with the film. Performance, which is like on the radio, and there's a couple other, there's another one where, I forget the name of this one, where your song can inspire a movie. Like the song "The Gambler" inspires a movie, so the movie has to pay the songwriter as a contributor to the story. There's 5 of them, and I forget the other one. So at a given moment, I've got some things that have been synchronized with TV shows. More money probably has come from things being played on the radio and TV, so from performances like that.
Okay.
Over time, and sometimes that's $300 or $400. One time, I'll tell you the one big one that stunned me is Chet and I wrote a tune called East Tennessee Christmas, and in the bridge, we were talking about how sometimes it snows and sometimes it doesn't in Tennessee. So it was like almost White Christmas kind of thinking. And we said, well, it might snow, but don't you know that I don't care. It'll be the best of Christmases if you are there. So the Weather Channel comes up, and they're playing weather songs. Let it snow, let it snow. And they started playing East Tennessee Christmas, and they all started doing it ahead of people like BMI giving them a license.
Oh, wow.
So BMI says, excuse me, knock, knock, knock. You owe us for this, and you've been doing this for 5 years, so you owe us this much. So now you'll notice the Weather Channel plays, they don't play my song anymore. They found out how much it was costing them to do that.
Wow.
And so I got a check for my share for several years, $26,000. And I called up BMI and I said, something is wrong. So, we know, we're going to get the rest of it for you.
Hang on, that's not what I meant by something is wrong.
Yeah. And so I just thought, and so that was a fluke where essentially the Weather Channel got caught doing something that they had to pay for in retrospect and change their business model. But every now and then something like that happens, so you can go, out to dinner,
A couple times.
Well, it ends up being spent on things like college tuition and all that kind of stuff. Sure. We all have expenses being a family that grows up, and so I think the thing I'm most grateful for is that I've been able to do what I love and pay the bills. That to me is huge.
Yeah.
Not that I'm a rich man or a famous guy or anything. I'm well respected within my fine print realm, but I've worked hard for that, and I'll continue to work hard for that. Make sense?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. There's another thing, and there may be a way to fit this in a little later, but I realize over time I've gotten good at recognizing an opportunity. Mm-hmm. In the music business, you don't answer classified ads.
Right.
What happens is something comes up and you say, I think I could contribute to a project like that. So you follow up a little bit. And I missed a few of those before I realized, okay, this is a moment where if I say what I would contribute to a project like that, sometimes that'll kind of get the project afloat.
Sure.
So that somebody says, or I know somebody who's a camera guy.
Mm-hmm.
I know somebody who could do the costumes for that. That's how the film business works too.
Sure, absolutely.
So I think spotting opportunities. The moment where Chet says to me, "Finish that up and send it to me," I could have said, "Yeah," because
He's
no,
Chet Atkins.
I thought
What's
he said, "Finish that up," and it's like this many words.
Sure.
If nothing else, if I do that, I will have done what he suggested. And it turns out that was like, just huge door opener. So
yeah, absolutely.
One of my favorite opportunity recognition moments was I was at lunch with Chet and Leona Boyd, the classical player from Canada, and Shel Silverstein, who we all know as the cartoonist and songwriter. And Shel described a record cover. He said, I'm seeing 4 guitar players in tuxedos, and they would play like they would look like a string quartet, but they would play all kind of music, and you could see Chet listening to him. So I left that lunch and I called my friend John Pell and I said, I think if you and I would come up with some quartet arrangements, Chet was kind of salivating when Shel mentioned this. Sure enough, within a couple of weeks, we're playing recordings of 3 songs for Chet, and Chet says, well, let me get Leona on the phone. So by me paying attention at lunch to Shel just kind of waving his hands, and that's how the cover looks on the Nashville Guitar Quartet record. That's his idea.
Wow.
But my quick follow of it, realizing that was a moment, to jump on.
Well, let's kind of dive into the whole relationship, not only with Chet, of course, but with with Lenny Breau, with Jerry Reed, with all of these guitar players who, not only have you been able to work with as a performer, but you have been able to work with as a writer, as someone who has arranged material for them. How does that work from a we'll start from a practical, then we'll start from a business side. But practically speaking, if you are working on an arrangement for Chet Atkins, are you thinking, I'm going to arrange this in a way that I think Chet would like it, or I think I'm going to arrange this in a way that I think Chet would play it, or are you arranging it in your style to then give to someone like that?
Yeah, that's really a good one. I think I have very seldom done something with a specific person in mind besides me.
Okay.
That's not always true. I remember when Chet and I were proofreading the first book we did together, he said something about me writing some songs and he would show them around. And I thought, who does he know? And I thought, well, he knows Jerry Reed. So I set out to write a Jerry Reed song.
Okay.
And I did it. I remember what I did. We were driving back to Dallas, and there was a commercial at the time for Raisin Bran. 2 scoops of raisins in every package of Kellogg's.
Sure.
Dee, 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 dee. So I wrote, I'm a red hot picker, a hot lick licker, finger picking, what do you know? I wrote these lyrics to that jingle, and got home and finished the song and so forth. And then sent it back to Chet, and Jerry recorded it. And Jerry's manager said, do you realize that never happens? Where somebody sends a song in like that, is that basically what's happening is the street finds out that an artist is going to record, and everybody goes through what they've got and says, oh, I think Bob would like this song, or I think I'll take the producer out to lunch. And it's all relationships, So the idea that you would write something with a person in mind is rare.
Okay.
So and I've kind of just, well, that's the other thing I think I'm really lucky about. I think I've just delighted myself, and people are paying me to keep doing it.
I mean, it works. It has worked for
Well,
you.
it has, when you do your own work like that, it does have an integrity to it, an honesty, a directness that makes sense. So yeah.
Absolutely. Well, has your writing process, before we get to the business side of things, has your writing process always been, sort of you solo, or have you, when you work up an arrangement, has it sometimes been you're sitting across from Chet, or you're sitting across from Jerry, and the two of you are working together?
I've done that more with Chet than just about anybody.
Okay.
There would be times, I remember he was writing a tune, I think it was called Young Thing.
Okay.
It had a kind of a boogie bass, and he was saying, I need some more boogie licks, to go with this tune. So we sat down one day, and I remembered, I played the accordion as a kid, so I knew how to go and do keyboard licks, So I showed him some keyboard licks, and he adapted them, so we went back and forth. And then he went back home and put all that together. So I was like a shadow contributor to that. I'm not an owner of a copyright or anything. And then other times, he would get half a song written, and East Tennessee Christmas was that way. He said, I've got this song started, and I think you would be a good person to help me finish it. So he started it, and he had some East Tennessee Christmas calling to me, da-da-da-da-da-da. That's what he had. By the time that day was over, we'd finished the song and made a rough demo onto a cassette. And I've seen him on other occasions called in other songwriters. He wrote a lot of songs that way with Randy Goodrum. So he was one of those people that really knew, okay, I've got this far with this. Who's my collaboration partner? He was a huge collaborator. With Jerry Reed, I remember I was going to write the book of how to play like Jerry. And I said, so I want you to show me these two. I ain't going to show you nothing. Chet didn't show you anything. I was back. Well, okay, I'm not showing you anything. So I had to learn them off the record like we all do,
Sure.
and then play them for him. And I remember one of his comments was, do that again? Nah, if it was that hard, I wouldn't have done it. Stuff like that. You get all this kind of, he's correcting you, but he's, kind of insulting you on the way. It was really fun to you really knew you were in when you got insults from Jerry. So.
Just as a giant Jerry Reed fan, I have to sort of ask the question: was that method that he put upon you with that? Was that because Jerry never played it the same way twice, so he might not be able to show it back to you?
He might not remember it. Yeah.
Okay.
But if I would play it, he could tell whether or not he would have done that.
Sure. Okay.
And I also remember when we were doing that book had the claw in it, and I really had a hard time figuring out the claw. And I'll tell you why. There's a thing here where you're doing thumb, index, ring and middle together, which makes 3 notes, right? So it's 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and downbeat. So you got a 3 thing happening against a 4 thing, and you're doing what appears to be, this is the old folk singer's lick, but was just 3/4 of it. So it's got this kind of a feel. I couldn't tell what he was doing.
Yeah.
But I wasn't going to ask him. So I did figure it out, and I said, I think I've got the claw. Oh, you haven't got the claw. I said, well, no point in showing me. You haven't got it. And I showed him what I had, and he said, do that again? Well, I'll be damned. I think a lot of people have tried to figure it out and gotten close.
Sure.
But that's something that, if we think about gifts and talent and all that kind of stuff, I would say perseverance and perfectionism are kind of, they don't look like musical skills, but I bring them. That's who I am, and I bring that. I don't quit until I think I've got it right, and that's a huge asset if you apply it, to a project like this. So
absolutely. Well, to bring this into the conversation of working and writing and collaborating, and sort of how that relates to a modern day business approach with music, I think a great, demonstrative thing we could look at is your recent collaboration with Tommy Emmanuel.
Yeah.
And if we could kind of talk about that for a minute, both, of course, the creative side and the business side, but you kind of use that as our base for this conversation.
Yeah.
You guys selected arrangements, or rather,
some songs. Yeah.
Right, some songs, and then came up with arrangements of material that I think was representative of both of you two in very different ways and in very similar ways. But let's talk about for a minute just sort of the business approach to that. Because, of course, we know Tommy has this team of people who represent him. And without going into specific numbers or anything like that, because that's not what this is about, how does a project like that come to be, first of all? And second of all, how does a project like that come to be in the background with the, royalties and all of that?
Yeah. By the time we did that project, Tommy and I had taught workshops together, and we would be somewhere, and I would start to play something, and he would play it with me. So we were kind of like doing ad-lib duets. And one of the duets that really stuck was He Ain't Heavy, He's My Brother, because of his relationship with his brother, Phil. And so I started changing what I was doing to really make room for Tommy instead of just letting him play licks on top of my arrangement. So that was one of the first, and in fact, I think there's a YouTube video of us playing He Ain't Heavy for the first time in Germany when we didn't quite have a duet arrangement yet, So if you can look for that out there. And then one of the things Tommy did was start a record label. And I think he did that because his recorded career was scattered over several continents and several record labels. And Brian, his manager, was realizing if he wanted to really have a career for Tommy, he needed to somehow pull together all of that stuff and be able to manage and control it. Well, try that, So in some cases, he just finally gave up and started a record label. And he didn't want to start a book publishing company. We knew not to do that, So that was where he started that record company, and C.G.P. Records. And I think our Heart Songs project might have been the second or third project they did. So now that he's a record label, so there's 2 or 3 things going on. One, I am negotiating a contract with a record label.
Yes.
So Tommy has an attorney, so I go to my attorney and we do all that stuff. I know the bullet points, but the attorneys make sure all the stuff is right. Then one of the tunes on there is a tune that I wrote after Paris. So I license my song to Tommy's record company.
Okay.
So when that album plays out there, Tommy and I get Spotify money. We get, we share in the revenue that comes from the record. But if After Paris gets played, I might get some Spotify money sent to my publishing company, Gutstring Music, that owns that copyright.
Okay.
Now, there would also be some artist money going back to, there's probably 3 or 4 ways to get paid. And it's a constant struggle with the business. The arrival of the internet as a music source really messed up being paid for music. And Spotify is still awful, you know. And there have been some new legislation. There's a thing out there we all kind of know about, BMI and ASCAP. There's a new thing out there called MLC, Music Licensing Collective, and it's strictly there to get licenses for what Spotify and iTunes do. It's a mechanical license for the internet.
Oh, wow.
And it's only about 2 years old. That's how quickly things have, you know. And so what's going to happen is, in its legislation, it's been passed, and it was passed so that all those guys who have been going to lunch on our music actually have to pay the salaries of the guys at the MLC.
Okay.
Nice touch.
Yeah. Wow.
So now all that money is coming in, and so there's probably 3 or 4 relationships in that album from a business sense, and for the most part, by then, Tommy and I and Brian, his manager, had enough stuff we'd done together that we could kind of sit down and do bullet points on a table napkin, and then let the attorneys create documents. So it was pretty straightforward. I wasn't negotiating with somebody in Chicago. You know,
Sure. Okay. Well, can we talk a little bit about maybe the practical side of working with other artists? Because I think your career reflects a great deal of success from collaborations.
Yeah.
And was that? I guess let me start with this.
Yeah.
Was that intentional, or was that just sort of the byproduct of your talents meshing with other artists like Tommy and Jerry and Chet so well?
You know, well, in the beginning, I think I saw it as a chance to work with my guitar heroes. You know? And then little by little, I realized every time I started to work with these guys that I brought something to it that they didn't have. You know, I realized at first I thought, oh man, Chet's letting me write a book, and I thought, he's not letting me write a book. There won't be a book unless I write it. You know? So I realized I was the one who was going to do this. And the first time I really saw that happen was when Chet introduced me to somebody as, this is John Knowles. He's my teacher. And I thought, no, you're my teacher. You know, why did he say that? You know, well, he said it for 2 reasons. One, he was learning from me, and also I was his teacher. I was teaching his people. So I realized I had a role to play in something he wanted to accomplish. And so that shifted my thinking. I mean, I realized I really brought something to the table. I wasn't just doing a chore.
Sure.
With Jerry was always real, that character we all seen in the movies, you know.
Right.
Except every now and then he wouldn't be that way. Sweetheart, real gentle soul. But near the end, I was visiting with Jerry, and he came over there and he put his hands out like this, and he said, "Come here." He grabbed my hand like a preacher does it going out of the service, you know. And he said, "I want to thank you for what you've done for my music." And I said, "Well, Jerry," he said, my turn. And he shut me up, and he thanked me for teaching the rest of the world to play his music, you know. So,
Wow.
So it's one of those moments. Oh, okay, I didn't know that was going to happen. And with Lenny, I really realized Lenny was never going to write a book. He knew all this stuff. He would answer any question you would ask him. So what I did was, I didn't set out to write a book. I interviewed him. And then the book is me transcribing the music and the text of the interview. So that was me kind of realizing in each case that there was a specific way to bring what I knew to the way that person worked. And I look back on it now that we're having this conversation, I'm thinking, I think I'm real adaptable. I bring what I know how to do, and I listen to what the project needs, and then I do this. You know? One of my students the other day reminded me that I had said something about be prepared to wear a lot of hats in the music business. I'd forgotten I said it, probably 30 years ago now. But I thought I was right, because it is what you have to do. You become, you know, a producer, a writer, you know, all those things. I mean, with the Heart Songs project with Tommy, he and I together imagined what that project would be like as we started to learn some songs. And then little by little, other people said, well, if you're doing that, try this song. And then his manager, Brian, was the one who came up with that title, Heart Songs.
Oh, wow.
That was, so it's all again, it's collaborative and that's also Nashville is built on co-writing songs. I think creative partnerships is pretty much the bread and butter of this town. So learning to work like that, I think, is a big deal. So.
Absolutely. Just to follow up very quickly with you were saying Lenny, and I just want to let everybody know Lenny Breau is who we're talking about with that. We haven't talked too much about your relationship and your work with Lenny Breau. So if we could kind of jump into that very quickly and sort of fill in the blanks with what that part of the conversation was.
Yeah.
I think that might be very informative for people.
Well, like everybody, I had those 2 albums, and of his, when I would listen to his playing, I just could not tell what he was doing. And I'd moved to town. We'd been here a few weeks, and Chet called me and said, "Lenny Breau is here." He said, I didn't know if he was still alive or not, So I went down and I met Lenny, and we were house sitting. So I said, "You can stay at our place until you find a place." So for several weeks, he stayed at our house. We were house sitting in, and then we helped him find a place on Music Row and so forth. So he and I, by then I was taking him places to play gigs and we were sitting around talking about stuff. And again, man, he was a music nut, and he was so generous. What I remember, so at that time, our daughter was about to be born, so our son was 6. So for 3 or 4 years, my kids knew him. My kids loved him because he was like a little kid in a lot of ways, I remember one of my favorite memories of how Lenny fought is we walked out one day to go somewhere, and we're kind of in a wooded area, and there's a rabbit sitting across the way, and the rabbit comes scampering over and sees us and freezes. And so Lenny freezes and stares at that rabbit for what felt like an eternity. I'm sure it was like 60 seconds, And then finally he went like this, and the rabbit scurried off. And he just had that little chuckle that Lenny would do, 3 years later, we're out in the woods somewhere, and Lenny turns to me and says, "You remember that rabbit?" Now, the thing that was funny is I did. But he was kind of living in kind of an eternal now, where everything that happened could be possibly something to contribute to what he did. So it's not just his music, but there's this, like this soup of reality that he's swimming in all the time.
Wow.
And it was challenging for him. That's part of what he was up against, I think, that ultimately put him in a bad place with respect to substance abuse and so forth.
Sure.
That's not the headline. The headline is this guy who was, as I told somebody once, knowing Lenny was like knowing Vincent van Gogh. Knowing Chet was like knowing Thomas Edison. Both important guys, but 2 very different approaches to creativity, So,
Sure.
So by the time, and we would do workshops around town. Somebody would rent the living room out, and we'd bring Lenny in, and players would all show up and ask Lenny questions. And what I realized is Lenny really knew what he was doing. When you would hear it, it just sounds like he's tapped into the universe, which he was. But also he knew step by step names of notes, what chord led to this, who would use that on this recording, all this stuff. And that's where I kind of realized if I was going to get him to teach, it was going to be to capture that, not to have him think about a book, because books would have been a door closer for him,
Wow, yeah.
And the book that Mel Bay still puts out is available with an audio of our conversation, so you can hear him. And some of the stuff is the outtakes. I'd say, "Linda, can you play me 12 bars and do a blues in C and use that scale?" "Oh, yeah, I can do that." And about 84 bars later, he would say, "That was too much, wasn't it?" So that's not on the, but that's the kind of, you could not give him an assignment. You just turned him loose, and he was in a field of creativity, And
Sure.
again, what a sweetheart, what a creative guy. And to know now all the other people who met Lenny at various stages, because I knew him so probably less than 10 years, probably 7 or 8 years up to the end of his life. So.
Wow. So kind of getting back on track with the, sort of, I guess, the material that we're talking about that has made your career, looking at what you're doing right now with stuff like TrueFire, it's very video teaching oriented. How did that start for you? Because I know that it didn't just start this year.
The first time I really got into it was video instruction had just started showing up out there in the public realm. And the big hits were How to Play Golf, like Jack Nicklaus, and then Jane Fonda's exercise video.
About what year would that put you?
It would have been early 80s.
Okay.
You know.
Okay.
So by 83 or 4, something along in there, probably 82, because Lenny was still alive, and we dedicated the project to Lenny. So, because he had died by then, so that's about right. And so we decided we were going to make an instructional video, and Chet says, well, you're going to have to come up with what we're doing. And so there was 2 or 3 things I learned. I watched the Jack Nicklaus one, and I watched the Jane Fonda one. And what I saw with Jane Fonda was number one, gorgeous, built like the exercise plan really worked, you know. I mean, she was like an advertisement for the, you know, you can look like me, but then you realize, no. And then I realized she was on camera with about 6 or 8 other people who were at varying stages of kind of clumping along like me, you know. Mm-hmm. And I thought, oh, that's part of the secret. Don't put Chet on camera. Put Chet on camera with a couple of people who look more like average human beings.
Right.
You know.
Okay.
So I got 2 of my students who were good. And this is another case where you realize the kind of partnership thing works. I chose 2 students who didn't talk much, who also were good, because I knew that Chet would try and bring them out.
Okay.
But if they were talkative, he wouldn't have to do that. So it kind of put him in the mode of doing this with the kids,
sure,
which we captured on camera. And then what we did for content is we wrote 6 or 8 kind of learning tunes, and then we put 3 or 4 tunes that were kind of in that beginning guitar realm. Country Roads, Yesterday by the Beatles, which we had to get licenses for, you know.
Yeah.
And one of the tunes, the first tune we wrote was one for getting in tune. And I had figured a long time ago, when you hear this, it doesn't sound like it, but you're hearing a pentatonic scale out of order. So we wrote this tune. That's all the notes on the guitar. And we wanted to get in tune. So my goofy sense of humor, which I've always trusted, was I'll write a tune that will help us get in tune easier in Tunisia. When the sun, when the moon shines at night, it will shed a lovely light in Tunisia, in Tunisia. And it gave us a chance, and that one kind of set the tone. So you learn to play the tune, and you're listening to all the tuning notes. E, B, and singing the notes, and then playing the song. And then at the end of it, Chet played some licks. So you've got chords, getting in tune, and Chet playing some licks. Because any of us who have ever taken guitar lessons, you know there's what you're learning, then there's always something, the red meat that the teacher dangles. Work on that, and I'll show you how to do this.
Sure.
You know, so each tune has got some bait along with the basics, you know. And so we ended up doing that, and it was advertised on cable TV and stuff like that, and we sold it back when you had to. And we would go to trade shows for instructional video. Wow. and do that. So that was really a company. And then along the way, my wife, Becky, learned how to be the bookkeeper for that. And then we partnered with Ray Stevens, had a distribution company.
Okay.
So we were really a little small enterprise called Atkins Video Society. And the video is still available. It's called Get Started on Guitar. And there's some clips from it on YouTube that you could probably go look for, you know.
I've got it.
Yeah, there you go.
I've got it.
And it's got a book, right?
Yeah, it does.
Now, that was one of the times when I still didn't have a way to write out music, but I wrote it out in pencil. And for a while, we had a publisher who wanted the project. So he typeset the music and then backed away from the project because he didn't know how to market it either.
Oh, wow.
And so what finally happened is Stephen Grossman's company marketed it. They were doing some things. And then Mel Bay said, I can give you wider distribution. So we've got a deal worked where we have a kind of a mail order business and a wide distribution, and then Atkins Video, which is 2 or 3 of us, a small enterprise, you know, and a publishing company called Atkins Video Music. You know, every one of those little elements that you've seen, and we license things. Mm-hmm. So all these things you've heard us talk about are a part of that project.
Wow. How are you credited on that? Are you director, producer? What is the...
Chet and I are co-producers.
Co-producers.
Yeah.
Okay. Very cool.
And Chet kind of wanted me on camera, and I thought, if I get on camera, I'm not going to be able to watch what's going on. And so there's some photographs of me in the studio with the troops. And Chet was kind of nervous, but I thought, for one thing, I knew he was going to like these kids. And sure enough, he would start teasing the kids, and they would tease him back, you know. My favorite outtake, which I've got somewhere, it's not in the thing, was Chet is trying to get Elizabeth to do something, and he turns to her and he says, and now Queen Elizabeth will show us how to do this, that, and this, you know. And she said, yes, I will, Sir Chester. He just was so cracked up that she would have done that, you know. Because at first he was like this, you know.
Sure.
And at one point, he said something to tease her, and she even kicked him in the shins, you know. They'd gotten so good. And that's what I was hoping for, was that their chemistry would help make the whole project work. So.
Sure. Well, kind of moving into present day with the video instructional stuff that you do now. Obviously, it's a little bit more present, so we'll avoid a lot of the, I think, stuff that might be considered proprietary information and maybe some privileged information with that. But you do a lot of stuff with TrueFire.
Yeah.
And without going into specifics with numbers or anything, how does that work with regard to fitting into your business model and your present sort of income? Is this I guess an A focus or a B focus for you?
Yeah, I think this starts off A and it's becoming B.
Okay.
I mean, B it started, now it's becoming A.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That makes okay.
So if you look at the TrueFire guys, remember the early days when you could make a phone call to a number on a guitar player article, and someone on the phone would play the lesson that was in that issue of Guitar Player?
I think that might have been a little bit before me.
Okay, but
I've heard about it.
But this was those guys. This was the TrueFire guys. They were already thinking
didn't know that.
media and teaching.
Wow, okay.
So I'm out here thinking media and teaching. So by the time I meet them, the first conversation we have is all about how it was obvious that we would meet at some point since we were, traveling this path. They really have developed an infrastructure which includes, servers and internet presence, video production, marketing, all that stuff for doing this. And then what they do with someone like me is they invite me in to essentially create content, a show, and it was really well supported. They sent me a spreadsheet with, say, this is the items that amount to one song. Title, show us the first bar, talk about how you wrote the song. So you got a script outline, a bullet pointed,
Right.
And so by the time I sit down at the TrueFire studio, I'm sitting down like this, and there's 3 cameras on me. One of them is just the headshot, the other one is this, and the other one is this.
Yeah.
So they're getting all that at once, and they've got 2 or 3 people over on the other side of the glass, making sure that the audio and the video and all that is down. And then they edit the whole thing together and send it to me and say, is this what you meant? And I say, well, over here, instead of showing this camera, show that one. Or you've got this in here twice, or whatever you do when you try and assemble.
Sure.
Because you're talking about, a 30, 40-minute program, and you can imagine how many clips in order to piece that all together. So, but they're really good at that, and they knew how to facilitate my creativity, give me a framework, in which to work. And then so that's the programs that they do. So the thing I did with Tommy is one of those. I've got a couple of them I did solo. And then they added an element because they realized that we're getting to the place where I can do this at home because phones are getting better and all that stuff, and I wouldn't have to fly to Florida as long as I have enough production sensibility. And so they basically taught, 100 of us how to sit down and do what you're doing. They bought me a couple of lights.
Okay.
I had some mics and everything. So they really kind of facilitated, and then they have the revenue sharing over here when we create something is one way. Then the revenue sharing is I get a larger piece of it if I create the content at home. But every now and then, and I would say several people have done this. Frank Mignola is really good. His home production is almost as good as studio production. So Frank can actually create a TrueFire course at home.
Oh, wow.
So now what they do is, again, they pay him a bigger revenue share because they haven't had to create the thing. But then all of it is available through the infrastructure that TrueFire has put together. So they're my creative partner, but they house the content, and they also collect their revenue and make a deposit in my bank. So I mean, it's all really set up to where it works that way. So my obligation is to promote it enough that people who want to subscribe to my channel, which is called Fingerstyle Buffet, can find me and subscribe. And they've also got it set up right now. I've got it set up where the whole level is you watching my lessons, but I could add that where once a week I would do a workshop, and those levels of participation. I'm going to add some of that stuff.
Great.
As I get farther into it. But I would say that TrueFire, along with Social Security, will become the two big ingredients in what I'm doing at this stage.
Wow.
So it's amazing to think that something I wasn't doing 10 years ago, all of a sudden, is the big slice.
Sure. Well, so you kind of touched on something there that as we sort of near the end of the conversation, I wanted to ask you about, and you mentioned Social Security. You are 80 years old.
Right.
And I think that you, like a lot of musicians, you don't plan on retiring, correct?
That's right. You know, it's funny. I have a retirement plan, but it hasn't kicked in yet. I feel very fortunate in that regard, you know.
Sure. So what is, without getting too personal, is it just because you are a guitar player, it's what you would be doing whether you were retired or not?
That's pretty much it.
Okay.
And I find that over time, like I would say, my creativity and my sense of what a project is growing all the time. My ability to be a fancy player is not, you know. So that's not about. So the teaching component and the creative component, I think, is definitely the next part. And also, every now and then, I want to hang out with my grandkids and do other things. So I want to shrink the amount of time I spend doing this. I'd say the other big piece besides the TrueFire teaching part would be workshops that I'm doing around the country. This year I'll do one with Tommy Emmanuel, one with Martin Taylor. There's a Rocky Mountain Guitar Camp that I'll do, Puget Sound Guitar Workshop. So 4 or 5 of those where you'll go for a week and hang out and teach in different ways, you know. So I've always loved those. It took me a while. That whole thing, if people out there are watching this, they're teachers. It's one thing to teach one-on-one lessons. As soon as you go now to groups, that changes. And now you go to a group of people that you're going to see this week, and then they're all going to be gone. That changes what you do. So you change how you present. And the thing I like about getting out there is I meet people I would have never met. And I've kind of learned how to send them home with 6 months worth of assignments. I'm not going to see them next week, you know. So it's a different model of teaching, I think. But I love doing it.
Sure. Well, actually, I have a follow-up of something that you just said right there. Because with all the stuff that you just listed, I didn't hear I have my concert series that I'm going to be doing. And while you have done that in the past, it doesn't seem like it's part of the business model currently.
You know, I think in every case I've done that, it's been when somebody else pulled me into it.
Okay.
And originally, so we arrived in Nashville, and Jay is 6, and our daughter is born about 6 weeks later. So my kids are little. I don't want to go on the road. I turned down all kind of road opportunities because I wanted to come home at the end of the day and see what the kids were up to. That was just a decision. So Becky and I made that choice about what was important in life and some things like that. And and I think everybody has to do that. You can't just say, well, I've got to make a living. You've got to live, you know. And so to make sure that making a living is not interfering with living. So now, you know, when I got out there and did the tour with Tommy, that was probably the most extensive tour I'd ever done. And that's when I found out how hard it is to do that too, how hard he works, and how much. Every time I've ever gotten involved in a project like that, I had to learn something new, and I had to up my game in order to be a participant, you know, to really bring something. And I've been really fortunate that I've had great projects come my way that have given me exposure, growth, some revenue. I mean, come on.
Right.
What are we supposed to ask for?
So, like I said, I think we're getting towards the end here, and I really appreciate you talking to me about all of these different things with your career. But one of the things that I wanted to sort of ask you about is your process of learning, because I think it's informed your life as a musician, but especially your career as a musician, because not only I think has it made you the musician that it has today, but it's also helped you teach other people how to learn.
Boy, that is so on it. And it took me forever to figure that out. What I kind of realized when I first started teaching was that I was telling them what I knew instead of listening to see what they needed to know. And so over time, I've learned to watch somebody play and listen to them think out loud and say, if I was you and I was trying to get past that, what would I do? Now what I'm sharing is my experience as a learner, not sharing what I know so far, which is a very different thing, you know.
Sure.
So what that means is I have to be really hip to how I learned along the way. And I know enough about how I learned along the way that one time I really remember seeing somebody do something, make a mistake I had never made. It was such a landmark moment. I said, I don't think I've ever made that mistake. You know, show me what you did. You know, but for the most part, I remember the stumbles and what I did to fix it. You know, so when we start out, for instance, my first instrument is really the accordion, and now and I'm like 6, 7, 8. You know, and by the time I'm 11, I buy a ukulele, and I realize the notes are all on there, but there's no black keys and white keys. So if you're a ukulele, you're really tuned up here. I'll come down here. So if I figured out, you know, this on a ukulele, this would be a G chord. It's a C chord for us. And I knew that there was a C and a G and an E in that C chord because I played the accordion. So I thought, which one is the C? Which one is the G? Which one is the E? Oh, that's a duplicate. You know, and that's what I did to teach myself how to navigate on the ukulele fretboard. As a matter of fact, one of my first big ukulele solos would have been Lady of Spain, right? Mm-hmm. The big guitar solo. And so that's what I was doing. And then when I needed to know, now, also I was doing this. I would sing this note, and I would sing this one. That's what it sounds like to go from a C to a D. This is the first note in the scale. That's the second note in the scale. This is the note that's in between them. So that right there, which was set in motion when I'm age 11, is a cornerstone of everything else I'm doing. I'm singing, I'm asking questions. I never set out to say, I think I'll learn where all the notes are. You know, I just didn't do that. I figured out after I'd done this for a while, the bass buttons on an accordion are lined up like C, and if you're going towards the floor, you get the flat keys. You get C, F, B flat. That's what the buttons are lined up like, that chord. So oh yeah, look, that's so that you're in the key of C, you'll have a G for a neighbor and an F for a neighbor. So you've got the 1, 4, 5 chords. Okay. Sit right next, or you'd be jumping all over the place, you know. Sure. So just like the piano keyboard is set up for the scale, the buttons are set up for chords. So what a great thing, because now what I'm trying to do, it means the first time I heard Chet play, I thought, he's like doing everything. Mm-hmm. He's doing boom, boom, and he's doing this. I didn't know how he was doing it, but I knew I had a mental template for that. The other thing that I think I've had all the way along, and this has to do with me as a learner, is that it doesn't bother me that I can't do something yet. Okay. Because I have probably an overdose of self-confidence, but it served me well, you know. But in this case, I would say, for instance, I'm hearing Chet play, right, on one of those albums. That was on the first album, like Glowworm. And now I'm playing along with Chet. This is me playing along with Chet. Just the bass note. Sure. And I would play along with those things in time, and from beginning to end, and the whole thing. And I had sketched an element of what was in that arrangement. And it didn't bother me that I couldn't play all those notes. in my mind, I was playing with Chet Atkins, at home, being 13 or 14 years old.
Sure. Well, I'm going to tee up on this one because you mentioned it earlier, but I
Yeah.
think it sort of informs what you're talking about right now. How come you didn't just go out and hire a guitar teacher or ask one of your classmates who's playing guitar?
Yes, so this is Houston, Texas, mid-50s,
Yes.
and the guitar had not caught on yet. The garage bands hadn't happened, the folk singer thing hadn't happened. Country music was doing guitar. And so in my end of town, I was the only guitar player I knew. I mean, that is to say, I was the only person I knew who owned a guitar. Mm-hmm. And you would go to a music store to buy a guitar, and they may or may not have one on the wall. They would have trumpets and pianos and so forth, And so I was basically, I bet I was 4 or 5 years into it when I stumbled into a little music store that was really a violin teacher, but he had several guitar players on the staff because he was getting into the guitar. And my first guitar teacher was a guy who directed a high school choir, but on the weekend played, in a little trio in a restaurant. So, and what I did was I said, I want to learn to play like Chet Atkins. And they all said, whoa, if you figure it out, let us know. They'd all heard it, and they were, but see, I wasn't deterred. But now, on the other hand, I remember hearing this. And I thought, oh, that's Chet playing. Liza, Liza, Liza. I'd never figured out what those chords were, but I heard them when he showed me. And I thought, so another piece of the puzzle. So everything I learned and every approach I learned is coming together to be one of the tools and part of the perspective, that I have. Now, I see people all the time saying, well, should I learn tab or should I learn notation? Or should I learn to read or should I not do that? And I'm thinking, wrong question. The question is, should I learn everything I possibly can to help me go as far as I can imagine that I don't want to be limited by what I don't know. So I've always been pretty obsessive, and I've been around, some classical players as well, not just guitarists. I almost got a chance to work with Leonard Bernstein, but he passed away.
Oh, wow.
I was going to do an educational project for him, so
Wow.
I ended up doing it for his family. But man, I would have loved to have been.
Of course.
Yeah. But to me, that's the whole palette. It doesn't matter if he doesn't know how to play the guitar. He knew some music,
Right.
So I think that whole thing of learn everything you can and learn it as well as you can learn it, knowing that you will find a use for it somewhere.
Sure.
So.
Well, I think that somewhat answers the next question, but I think that maybe we can dive a little bit deeper into it. If you were to sit down with a guitar player today who says, I want to make a career with this instrument, maybe they move to Nashville, maybe they're somewhere else, what is your advice to that person who knows what the dream is but doesn't know what the plan is?
Yeah. I think, first of all, you got to do what you just did. Find somebody who is doing it and start that conversation. And I know if you were in a town anywhere nowadays, there would be a community of people who are making a living playing music. If you were in some small town, it would be somebody who plays in a restaurant or at a motel or that kind of thing. So what you want to do is you'd get advice like develop a repertoire, develop a sense of professionalism about showing up on time. When I think I worked at the Hawaiian restaurant playing all the Hawaiian tunes, it didn't take me long to realize that I wasn't like some famous guy in a club. Me and the cook and the bartender and the server and the cashier were all in the same business. We were I'm out on a Friday night and I want to have a nice time business. So I wasn't special because I was a musician. So you really realize it's a job like that. Now, different people who hire you have a different expectation. In that case, it really was to create a Hawaiian atmosphere and to take a break on time and be back. And you learn so many things from being in a band like that, So, and also, what I remember about that gig was getting the gig and realizing we knew 3 songs, and we thought we would have a couple of weeks to learn some more songs. The guy says, no, I need it to start tomorrow night. So we showed up knowing 4 songs and learned songs on the bandstand over several weeks. So the idea that you have to be on your toes, and also the fact that you owe something to the other people who are in the band with you, you owe them your best effort. Your job is to make them look good as well as, it's not just about you. So the personalities, don't be a jerk thing, and,
Sure.
and be a good working partner. It's all a part of it. And then if you're in a different city, you might do that for a while, and you might say, I'd like to go to a music center. And nowadays, the music centers are more diverse. I would say almost any good-sized city has an infrastructure of music, video, acting, filmmaking, and it's really the same thing. Even Nashville, which you think of as a music recording town, is a film center, a set design center, a costume center. That's why when television came along, you could kind of do all that stuff. So you're in the same business that filmmakers and script writers and costume designers, choreographers are all in the business you're in. So making friends with them and learning how to work with them always pays off, for sure.
Sure.
And when somebody does you a favor and it pays off, get back to them and say, hey, that thing you told me about so and so, I did that the other day and it really helped me out. Be grateful, to people that have given you a leg up along the way. Chet would love to hear that I'd met somebody and was doing some work for him. I remember one of my favorite thing when I came to town. I had a friend who knew Ralph Emery, who had a radio show at the time, and he introduced me to Ralph, and so I'm playing on Ralph's radio show within a few weeks of when I got here. So Chet and I are at lunch, and Ralph comes in, and so Chet's over there. Chet's sitting across from me, and Ralph sees me and says, "Hi, John," and he walks up to the table. "Oh, hi, Chet." And Chet's thinking, why is he saying hi, John, before he says hi, Chet? And so we're talking a little bit, and Ralph walks on, and Chet says, "Did you tell Ralph you were working with me?" I say, "I think I did." He said, "John," he said, "tell people you're working with me. Drop my name. Don't make my job hard." Oh, okay. And I realized taking me to lunch was, as soon as somebody takes you to lunch, it may look like lunch, but it's a chance to meet and be seen. And Chet knew the power of being seen with him, for instance.
Wow. Okay.
So all those little things that make you a better musician, a decent human being, they all play a role in the way you're going to do something for a living.
Okay. Well, John, thank you so much for doing this.
Oh man, you
Thank
got
you
it.
so much. I feel like we could just go on more for hours and hours.
Absolutely.
But would you be willing to pick us a little something?
Oh yeah. I remember one of the things that Chet would always say is he'd say when you get a chance, play your hit. For a while my hit was The Entertainer because that's the only thing I'd done.
Sure.
But more recently, my tune After Paris is my hit in the sense that I've had more people play it for me. They've learned it. When you're a teacher, composer, player, and people are learning your music, that's a nice touch.
Yeah.
And I have to tune the 6th string down the D.
Sure.
Well, Cody, as we've chatted a bit, you've kind of noticed how I do what I do, but I also reflect back on how I did it a lot, And that's really true with writing or arranging a tune. So this tune, After Paris, I was just playing some minor chords and kind of remembering some keyboard harmony from that music theory course I sat in on. And then also I'm remembering that I had been over in France with Marcel Dadi. So they had a certain story, emotional component to it. And so when I first started writing the tune, I found myself back in Paris again. And I thought, Paris again, no story. After Paris, story, And as a matter of fact, there's that line in Casablanca, we'll always have Paris, So in that sense, it's about the story, the romance of the city, and all that. I'll check my tuning.